The second type of violence is a psychological violence. If I can make you believe that you are less than, if I can make Black people believe that they're less intelligent than me, if I can make women believe that they don't belong in certain roles and leadership roles, if I can make queer people believe they'll never have a happy marriage or they can never live their true self, then I don't even have to worry about them entering my space fully. They'll stay out of their own accord. It's like very brilliant as a construct, right?
So I'm gonna dive like straight in.
Go for it.
Just getting obviously uncomfortable, but I mean, it's just speaking about your life. So you and your brother are both gay, you know, with your mother being a devout Christian. I mean, talk to me about that dynamic, you know, and how long did it take for you to get out, and what type of thoughts were you battling with, you know, before you actually said, okay, enough is enough. This is me. This is who I am.
Sure. Wow. I mean, yeah, there's actually quite a lot to say on that. So, so let me take you through the journey. I guess it's a really personal and very complex journey, because sexuality is policed or determined or set from really, really young, right? From being a young boy and like, oh, the girls are gonna love you, you know. So sexuality, we are as human beings sexualized from really, really young without us really knowing it. So, you know, the idea of homosexuality in my house was never an option. I guess from my mom's side, who is very Christian, it was seen as sinful. And then I guess even from my dad's side, who isn't necessarily a Christian, you know, the little comments, the little rewards and punishments that we subtly see from our parents. You know, I remember I think it might have been a Carte Blanche episode, and there was something about a gay couple, and my dad was like, "Oh, gross." You know, that communicates everything. You know, you don't have to say, "I don't want you to be gay." That communicates everything, because as a child, you're like, "Oh, okay, cool, that's a punishment. Oh, that's not good." And I think what's really important about identity and about our preferences is that our preferences are not our own. We are taught what to like. I always am fascinated by our feelings. Like, we are taught what to feel. We always like to think that our feelings are our own. They're not, right? We are taught to have a certain reaction to certain things. So in sociology, the conversation around the disgust reaction, we are taught to have that reaction. Mostly, I think, in feminist theory, how we are taught to be disgusted by menstrual blood. You know, that isn't a natural reaction. We are taught that is disgusting and shameful, and women must keep it. We are taught to be disgusted by breastfeeding in public. These aren't natural reactions. So our emotions are not to be trusted. But kind of moving on to that, we're taught that some things, through our emotions, that some things are good and some things are bad. And that was very much the case for my family. I think compounded with that, I was also bullied in school, right? I was also an effeminate boy, which at the time was, you know, I guess the language around then was like, oh, you must be gay. But really, it was just my gender expression was a little bit more queer and a little bit more feminine. But we kind of think that gender and sexuality is the same thing. So there was kind of a lot that was not in my favor in terms of owning who I am. I had my mom, I had my dad, and then I had societal kind of bullying saying, oh, don't be this thing because it's clearly shameful. So my sexuality, I think as a whole, was repressed. It wasn't even like I was repressing homosexuality. Like, for me, sexuality as a whole concept was a taboo. So only when I started to engage with my actual sexuality, so forget about it having an orientation, just sexuality as a concept, was very late in my life. I would think like in 18, 19, 20. And then as that kind of engagement with my sexuality grew, then so too did the questions around what and who it is that I found attractive. And of course, that brings up a huge amount of shame because it's like this thing that I've been so scared to be. It's like, oh, I didn't want to prove those people right who kind of bullied me for being gay. So you kind of resist it, but it just gets to a point where you're like, I kind of need to do this for my own mental health. So I think I was very depressed, finished varsity, came back to Joburg, started working in a law firm, and it was intense. I checked myself into I started to see a therapist. And I think in that process, it was like, if I'm being honest about me not wanting to be in law and that it doesn't make me happy, there's also this other thing I need to be honest about. And that process of coming out was very, very painful for my family, but something we've worked through, I think, to a point that is manageable. My brother came out 3 years ago, which is like about many years later after me.
Sure.
Which in some ways I think was great for him, obviously, because I'd done all that hard work and like breaking it into the family. But I mean, I just want to actually, I've actually have never spoken about this, is that I actually don't identify as gay. I actually, and I'll tell you why I don't identify as gay, because I'm actually currently dating a woman. So,
Interesting.
yeah, no, it's been super interesting. So, I mean, so the person I'm currently dating, we've been friends for like 3 years, and then literally in March this year we hooked up, and it was like, oh, okay, so my identity is in flux again. So this has kind of brought in a new complexity because I am a queer man. There's no doubt about it. I mean, so one could say, yeah, maybe I'm pansexual, I'm bisexual, whatever it is, but this kind of, again, another reorientation. And really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is how crudely we understand identity and sexuality, how basic our understanding of it is. That because you're attracted to men, you now must be gay, and that is the only thing that. And some men are, right. Some people are like, I'm only attracted to men. That's right, but actually, our sexuality is so fluid. It moves in and out. Sometimes we're more attracted to some people than others. Sometimes we just don't have any attraction for people. But I think society is so desperate to create meaning through this acronym, through that we don't actually allow for the fluidity of the spectrum. And I think in me now dating Victoria, it's like brought in a totally different conversation for me, because now I'm a queer man who's in a heterosexual relationship, whose gender expression is also quite feminine. Like, what is that? What is that? Like, that is a mess, And I think the complexity of that isn't lost on me. And I also find it fascinating because, again, like, I found so much comfort in my gay identity because that's who I was, right? And as soon as that's challenged, you're like, whoa, what am I? And, I can sometimes feel myself clutching at a new thing. Like, what am I now? And I really had to settle in, I'm just a queer person in a ostensibly heterosexual relationship. And there's complexity in that we have to work through. And like, I've got to now come out again to my friends. And a lot of my gay friends are like, but wait, we don't want this. Like, we want gay Roy. And it's been a really fascinating journey. So from an LGBT perspective, like, will always identify as a queer man. It's just, I've engaged with like a really interesting, like, the fluidity of sexuality and me trying to find comfort in that. So that's been really interesting. And new development.
Wow. Yeah, that's also just threw me off guard. Because I think as a society, you alluded to it, we always want to place someone in a box. Like, okay, you are this, and now you need to act like this. And I was like, okay, it was very fascinating for me. Like, you don't identify as queer anymore.
You are queer, but
you're dating a woman, you're heterosexual relationship, which is almost like, it's fucking up my mind. Excuse the French, Just on that, do you believe identity keeps on changing? Is identity fluid as well as, you mentioned sexuality? just to build on that.
So what is identity, right? Identity is essentially a performance. We perform an identity.
Mm.
You perform your blackness. You, as a black man working in a white corporate space, tone down the performance of your blackness in some instances. In some spaces that are maybe majority black, you up, what's it, you like inflate the performance. Maybe sometimes at home when we go back to, or if you go back to rural parts, again, so identity is a performance in every aspect of it, right? We perform our culture, our religion, our race, our gender. You know, I find myself performing my gender because I do CrossFit, right? So in those spaces, which are sometimes quite hyper masculine, I am performing a masculinity, or I'm choosing not to perform a masculinity. So I go to CrossFit in tights, and that is a very conscious thing of me not performing. But what identity is a performance. And that's not a bad or good thing, right? It's how we make sense of the world. We are always going to perform an aspect of our identity in more or less degree in order to create acceptance. Because everything about society is reward and punishment. Everything. From birth to death, we are taught how and what to be, what is rewarded, what is punished. And identity is the same thing. We know what a good black is in the space. We know what a good white is in the space. We know what a good gay is in the space. We know what a good woman is in the space. And so we learn this through our lives. And then, of course, so if you think of we are like a box of pencils, and each of those pencils is an identity of ours. And we just pull out the pencil that we think is appropriate in that moment. And that's not inauthentic. That's not like, oh, that's so inauthentic. You must be your authentic self all the time. I'm like, that is such a basic and incorrect understanding of the complexity of identity. It is so impossible to always be your authentic self because it just doesn't exist. Like, that isn't a real thing. So for me, identity is a constantly evolving thing. And as we've seen, so identity, like I said, is a performance, and we're constantly learning the boundaries of that performance, right? So what is masculinity, particularly for boys who go to all boys schools? But let's kind of say all men. We're kind of given a script. This is what masculinity is. And it's like, must be strong, blah, blah, all those tropes.
Yep.
And we kind of have to read from the script, right? And that's what identity is, right? We're just performing the script. And some boys struggle, right? They struggle to read the script. And then they're punished for it, right? Some boys are really good at that, but that's not really who they are. And they also struggle, right? Internally. So when identity shifts is when we actually update the script. And we're seeing that now, right? We are encouraging men to update their script of what they thought masculinity was. We are encouraging black people in corporate, at least I am, but I know that it's not easy to bring more of themselves. But again, there are always rewards and punishments. So identity is not a static thing. It is a constantly evolving process in terms of what we can perform within society, but also within ourselves. We're constantly redefining what blackness or whiteness means for us, or what masculinity, and it's not about saying they're good and bad aspects. It's like, what works for me? What aspects of my masculinity aid me and bring me joy and bring me security, and what things no longer serve me? There's a really fantastic, it's like my favorite theoretical understanding of identity, and it's actually called disidentification. So in a nutshell, there are two theories of identity. One either identifies as something. So you're given the script and you take on the script entirely and you become that man, right?
Yep.
That's to identify. The other one is to counter-identify. So you're given the script of what a good man is and you reject it entirely, okay? But disidentification sits right in the middle and it says, we are complex. The world is complex. How do I look at both of these scripts as both identifying and counter-identifying and take what makes sense for me? And for me to constantly reevaluate what that is. And I love that one can constantly be assessing what parts of our blackness, of our religion, of our culture, of our language, of our sexuality work for us and which don't, and bring them into that box of pencils, not inauthentically, but as what makes sense to me right now. And maybe I reevaluate in a month, maybe I reevaluate in 25 years. What's the difference? But it's not a static point.
Wow. Okay, it's a new concept to me, which I'm going to research further, but I do love that because I do believe it's never either or. It can be almost like a spectrum, and almost like you keep on going back and forth in terms of what is working for you at that moment. And I'd love to explore identity even further because it wasn't a topic I was actually planning to speak on. But just in the interest of time, I'd love to move on to violence being used as a powerful tool. Something you actually touched on, which is very interesting for me. I mean, you spoke about like physical fear, psychological fear, and it's also systemic. And yeah, I'd love for you to just unpack that. Why do we do that? And, why do we use that as a tool?
Yeah. So like I said, everything about society is based on these two forces of reward and punishment. And we need to, as individuals, start to see this more, right? So when we are talking about reward, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about approval, appreciation, acknowledgement, compliments, praise, likes on social media, gifts, yes, monetary reward, everything about it, right? Much like when we think of punishments, we're not only talking about physical punishment, we're talking about a disapproving look, being shouted at, not getting likes, being uninvited, being alienated, being excluded, right? These are all social rewards and punishments. And what reward and punishment does is it sets the boundaries of how to be in society, okay? So that's fine, that is what it is. But the question here is not whether reward and punishment is good, it's who is setting the boundaries of what is rewarded and what is punished. That's the question, right? Who is saying what is a good black person and a bad black person? Who is saying what is a good woman and a bad woman? And actually, when you zoom out and you see who's setting those boundaries, you realize there's a single archetype setting those boundaries. And it's mostly white, male, straight, able-bodied, Christian, English-speaking, ideological understandings of the world. Who says what a good woman is and what a good black person is. And we as society adopt these rewards and punishments without us even knowing it, right? Good girls don't do that. No, boys don't do that. We don't play with Barbies. We don't wear dresses.
Yeah.
And we nudge people into the box that has been set for us, okay? Now, violence sits in that punishment space. And violence has been a very, very powerful, incredibly powerful tool for setting the boundaries of society, of what is acceptable and what is not. So when we think of violence, and the reason why I'm interested in violence is because we're using it a lot nowadays, right? Particularly like the woke circles, like this is violent, that's violent. And sometimes we use it flippantly, but it's important that we actually understand what we mean. So and there are many types of violence, but I'm going to just break it down into three simple components and how it's used. So kind of what I was saying and what when we look at it is that we have a part of the human history and present and human experience is violent, is a violence.
Yeah.
And when we look at it, so the first aspect is of physical violence, right? So as humanity, we have used physical violence very effectively against each other for a particular social purpose. And that social purpose is to create fear in the other. So when I am the one inflicting violence, what it does is it creates a hierarchy. It puts me in a powerful position. It puts you in a diminutive and an oppressed position, right? That is the strategy of violence. Remember, violence is never random.
Yeah.
Sexual violence, what we're seeing with GBV, is not random. Queer violence Corrective rape is not random. It is there to sustain a hierarchy that I am in power when I get to inflict violence on you. What it does in the person who is receiving on the receiving end of that violence is it creates fear. Now, why fear is very important is because if you're frightened of me, you will never come into my space. You will never challenge me. You will never rise up. And that is the strategy. I need that because I need you to stay in the kitchen. I need you to stay in the township. I need you to stay in the closet, right? Because then then everything that is in my world is mine. It centers around me. I don't have to worry about your menstrual cycle. I don't have to worry about your pay inequality. I don't have to worry about your right to vote. I don't have to worry about your needs and the pronouns. It is all about me. And that's what privilege is. It is centering my own interests. So violence, physical violence is important because you will be frightened, right? You will enter my spaces with your head lowered.
Yeah.
Because you're frightened, right? You don't want to get hit. You don't want to get struck. You don't want to. So I will abide by your space. I'll enter your space in a small way, in a diminutive way, because I am frightened of you. That's the first type. Very effective, very obvious. But yes, we discuss it, but like we don't understand that violence, like I said, is not random. It sustains a hierarchy. Really important. The second type of violence is a psychological violence. If I can make you believe that you are less than, if I can make Black people believe that they are less intelligent than me, if I can make women believe that they don't belong in certain roles and leadership roles, if I can make queer people believe they'll never have a happy marriage or they can never live their true self, then I don't even have to worry about them entering my space fully. They'll stay out of their own accord. It's like very brilliant as a construct, right? Because we don't have to, as a white person, I don't have to worry about you stepping and challenging me in a leadership role because you'll say, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready. I need a little bit more time. That's brilliant, right? Because then again, my interests are centered. So now I don't have to physically keep you out through violence, which maybe makes me feel like a bad person. Now I just make you believe that you're not good enough for this, and you won't even step in of your own accord. So with psychological violence, and we have a history of it, Black people are animals. They're less intelligent. They've got smaller brains. Women have a womb which makes them incapable of thinking rationally, and hence why they cannot lead. Queer people are mentally unwell, was put in the DSMs. It's a mental health condition. Like, this has been a systemic process of making people who are not white, straight, able-bodied believe that they are not good enough, that they're not human. And that's the genius, right? Because then you'll never step into my space. And again, privilege remains centered.
And one could actually argue that the psychological violence is actually more powerful than even physical, because once you can control the mind, everything else that leads from there, the other person wins, basically.
And also, remember, we exist in a world where we're like, oh, but we're not physically violent towards Black people anymore. So why aren't you, what's the problem? Because we don't want to look at the hundreds of years of psychological violence and trauma. And now just because I don't hit Black people doesn't, now what? Now we fine. So it's way more invisible and way more toxic because it works on that psychology, right? So there's lots of conversations that Black women are leading in terms of internalized depression, that I have internalized the badness that society has told me to believe about myself. And that's really toxic and is a form of violence as well. And then the other violence is really this idea of systemic violence. And it's a bit of a tricky one to explain because all of this is systemic, all of it is part of the system. But systemic violence for me is kind of like, it creates the continued invisibility of these elements of exclusion, right? So the closet for queer people is a systemic way to keep queer people, queer issues, queer inequality, queer violence invisible. The home, the one thing I learned 2 years ago, and it will never leave me, we only talk about domestic violence because we've domesticated women. Like, why is it domestic violence? Because we've domesticated women. So the home is important to be separate from the work because women need to be invisible to us. The violence, physical and psychological, that they experience in the home must be separate to us. We don't want to see that. Systemic. The same thing with mental institutions, right? A lot of work on that. Like, it is to keep people who struggle with mental illness invisible. The same way for disabled people. It's like put them in homes. It's the same way for poverty. Like here in Johannesburg, put Alexandra Township on that side, away from the suburbs. That is really strategic because then we don't have to look at it, right? It sustains that invisibility. And that in and of itself is also a violence that it renders invisible. So these violences, when we look at it, sustain, or were used to create and sustain hierarchies of privilege. And really, it's to privilege white, straight, able-bodied, Christian, English-speaking, upper-income people, right? Because that is seen as the center, and that is seen, I guess, as the oppressor, even though people kind of get uncomfortable by that. And of course, that we sustain the social hierarchies through certain forms of violence. Even if today we're not, like I said, making Black people come through a separate entrance, doesn't mean that part of the psychology of Blackness entering white spaces, this is not my home, I don't belong here.
Wow. Lot to take. Wow. No, thank you, Roy, for that. Yeah, it's a lot to take in. It might sound like a stupid question, but I'm a fan of just asking questions that some people actually think about, I think. What is the benefit of me not being racist? What is the benefit of me not being homophobic, Why uncover my implicit bias? Why make myself feel uncomfortable? Especially for that archetype you're speaking about, white, Christian, male, English, like, what's the benefit? Why must I go through all of this?
This is such a great question. This is not a bad question. This is not a stupid question at all. This is the fundamental question. I'm going to use an analogy. I don't eat any meat products. I'm a vegan. Why am I a vegan? I'm a vegan because for 3 reasons. Number one, animal farming and the animal husbandry industry is the single cause of environmental decay, deforestation, greenhouse gases, right? Our world is dying. I want to be part of the solution. Cool. The second element, of course, is there's a health implication, particularly on how we are farming and what is in our meat and what is in our dairy. Cool. The third reason, however, is the fact that animal farming and the slaughter and the farming of animals is a violence. And if I believe that violence between humans needs to be eradicated, I also need to problematize the fact that humans can say that animals are animals and are hence less than. Because humans have done that with other humans, right? White people did it with Black people. They said Black people are fauna and flora. We did it in Australia. We did it here in South Africa. We've done it. We said animals are Black people are animals. So I then kind of look at that. I'm like, oh, so we're doing the exact same thing. It's the same principle for me, right? It's just human privilege instead of like white privilege, right? That we get to exert dominance and violence over. So if I have a problem, I have a problem with that, right? So where am I going with this? Why, if we know all of these things, if we know that animal farming is literally destroying our planet, if we know the suffering and the pain that animals go through, and we've seen those videos, I'm sure we've seen one or two on, if we know these things, why do we still eat meat? And here's the reason. Because eating meat is lekker. It's nice. And you know what's also nice? Being white. It's so nice. You know what's also nice? Being a man. It's so nice not having to worry every time I get into an Uber and worrying, am I going to get home safely? Am I going to be sexually assaulted? It is so nice being white and knowing that I'm going to be treated beautifully. I'm going to get the best interest rates. It is so lekker to do that. So when we're talking about behavior change and we ask the question like, what is in it for me? This is the fundamental question. Why on earth would I want to give this wonderful experience up? Why on earth would I want to do it? And I think in there is a really tough philosophical question for me in the work that I do, which is in this idea of behavior change. And it's kind of saying, well, why? Why should I do this? There's a couple of things. One could say it is the right thing to do, right? We could say that in doing this, in unpacking my bias, in looking at my privilege, in understanding as a man how I make women feel unsafe, even if it is not my intention, in doing that, there is a social benefit. And the thing is that that social benefit is hard for me to quantify because I'm going to internalize it as, okay, well, now I'm going to have less. And you know what? I think that that is the truth, but that is okay, right? I think we need to start sitting, because we've been brought up in this capitalist world which says there isn't enough for everybody. We internalize that. So now me talking about letting go of my whiteness means, but now I've got to compete with black people and then there isn't enough. And that isn't correct. So yes, it is the right thing to do if we want a socially just world, if we want to be eliminating violence, if we believe that we can live with social cohesion and harmony. We all need to be part of that project. Absolutely. I do think there's another aspect of it, and I haven't really fully thought this through. And there is some personal liberation in letting go of anger and fear and hate. There is, right? When we actually are not so concerned about who's gay and who is trans, and we're not that concerned about our children being gay or transgender, and we're not actually concerned about our wife earning more than us, and we're actually not that concerned over a black person getting the promotion over me, there is a liberation in that as well. And it's not this like resignation, like, well, it's like, actually, fuck yes, like, yes, let's all benefit from this. So I think there's a personal benefit to it as well. There's a liberation in it as well. And then, of course, there's the ability to build, I don't know, quality relationships. It's like, I can go and have a best friend who's transgender, and maybe there's beauty in that. But the fundamental, like, we can talk about all the benefits. I think the way we get to those benefits is I first have to sit and say, but it's actually really, really nice to have a braai in the weekend. It tastes so good. Like, it's really nice to be white. It's really nice that my whiteness acts as a credential. Am I really willing to let that go? I don't know. So I don't know. I didn't answer your question because I don't think there is an answer to it, but I just want us to look at the complexity. And the reason I use the meat eating example is I did a talk at an LGBT conference last year, 2 years ago. It was when we could do it in person. And everyone was like, straight men need to be here. We need behavior change from straight men, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, but we're all going out now. And literally just outside the room is a whole spread of food, of all the violence that so we're very quick to say, he must change. That white person must change. That man must change. But it's very, very difficult not to say, what is it about my behavior? How do I implicitly play into violence and play into oppression and dominance without me knowing it? And then when it's reflected back and it's like, but it's so nice to eat meat. And it's like, yeah, it's also nice to be white. It's also really nice to be a man in corporate.
Which is actually a nice segue into, racism is such a big topic, and in one of your videos you spoke about, I was actually laughing when it's like we have all these issues and it's almost like you're in a queue, right? There's racism, there's economic inequality, inclusion, femicide, unemployment, and you make an argument about dealing with all of them at the same time, but and we're all on this moral high horse. I want to know from your side, are there some issues that are bigger than others, if that makes sense? Where, for example, if you can, and it can have a domino effect. So if you tackle racism, then somehow, some way, the classist system will fall, or we tackle inequality, we tackle unemployment. What's your view on that? Or all issues, are they all equal?
Sure, this is such a difficult question. And I'll tell you about my thinking right now, right? And obviously, my thinking may also change. There is thinking from a academic, Robin DiAngelo, who does extensive work on race in the States, that when we unlock or solve for racism, a lot of the social issues fall away as well.
Mm.
Or maybe said differently, that when we unlock or solve for racism, it gives us the tools and the key to start unlocking a lot of the elements. So what we need to understand is that racism, sexism, homophobia, eating meat, ableism, xenophobia all sits on the exact same base, right? It is the same base. It's the base of I'm more important than you. We use violence in order to sustain the hierarchy. So I think there is argument to say that if we focus and we solve for race, the tools and the understanding of ourselves and systems will help us in the same time to unravel the exact same systems that exist, because it's literally the same structure. It's the same system for each one of those things. There's dominance and there is oppression. Dominance has been established through a series of violence, and it is sustained through those different violences. It's the same model for that, and you've heard me move interchange between race, gender, and sexuality fluidly in this whole conversation because it is the same model. The only difference is the actors change. So you may be a victim in terms of racism, but a perpetrator in terms of homophobia. So and it's because the actors change in different roles that we often say, okay, well, let's just look at racism, right? And when we look at Fees Must Fall, that was the big critique, right? It was like, no, I know we're talking about racism here and fees must fall from an economic perspective, but there was deep, deep, deep homophobia within the Fees Must Fall movement, right? And that was the big critique of it. They're like, but why can't we talk about trans issues? And they're like, no, trans issues, we'll get there. And they're like, that's not how this works. So I think the challenge for South Africa is racism. It's the one that we understand. It allows us to access it. Racism is linked to our class structure, so hopefully we can solve for both at the same time. But that doesn't mean that there isn't work on patriarchy within different race groups that we need to be talking about, as well as homophobia. So I think it's really just a matter of like, where does our appetite lie? We don't have an appetite yet to delve deeply into disability and into LGBT, right? We don't, but we have a big appetite for race. So maybe we honor that appetite and we try work to solve it. And in the process, we are building the tools to when we are ready to look at gender-based violence legitimately, we can do it. But also understanding, I think this is really important to understand, these things are not separate, right? Racism in South Africa, which leads mostly to social inequality and economic inequality, is a very big driver of gender inequality and gender violence, right? So we can't see these things as separate. So again, there's no direct answer, right? We can't just be looking at racism because these things are all linked. We can, however, focus and learn from that and try and apply it, right? It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Which is very interesting. I mean, you touch on Fees Must Fall, and you said, like, obviously there were different issues that people were trying to bring up, which speaks to something you were actually speaking on about. We have shared angers and fears in South Africa. You know, can you just briefly talk to me about that? Because there's the issue, you know, of racism, or we talk about land, or you know, femicide, etc. But you say the real issue is actually about our shared angers and fears.
Yeah, totally. There's actually one layer below that. So it's a model that we've developed called the layer cake, which is quite simple. This is 3 layers. So this is a model that we've developed on how we understand society and how it plays out. And when you think of like the media, when you think of social discourse, the conversations we have as society, this is a way to understand it. So at the top of the layer cake, the things that we see, the things that we discuss, the language we use is the factual matrix, right? It's the first thing. And this is, like you said, femicide, gender-based violence, racism, our elections, ESCOM corruption, Zuma being let out on medical, whatever it is, that's there. And that's the stuff that we're very comfy talking about. It's on radio, it's on social media, it's on the news, blah, 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 blah. And we love to kind of talk about those things because they feel academic. It's like safe, it's accessible, we think it's unemotional. And that's cool. We love to chat about those things. Underneath that factual matrix or the factual space is the emotional matrix. So it's a space we don't really like to go. And really, when we think about it, the two dominant emotions in South Africa, in the world at the moment, is just intuitively anger and fear. And it's this anger and fear, actually, that drives all of the conversations in the factual matrix. So what do I mean by that? We can be talking about Eskom, we can be talking about corruption, we can be talking about Zuma's parole, we can talk about Helen Zille's tweets, but we never find resolution in those spaces because we're actually using those conversations as a vehicle or a proxy to talk about our anger and our fear. So we kind of use corruption to talk about my anger as a white person or my fear as a white person. But I don't want to talk about my anger and fear because we're too scared to talk about it. We're told we're not allowed to. So we're constantly trying to use things in the factual matrix to express that I'm just fucking angry or I'm just scared. So this anger and fear, like you said, is not white anger or black anger and white fear or colored anger and Indian fear. It's actually a shared anger and fear that we all have. It just shows up differently. So we all kind of, if you think about, there's an amazing academic called Sarah Ahmed who talks about emotions as a currency, how we trade in emotions, and how the more you trade, like in any economy, it gains more value. So our anger and fear becomes heightened. So look at farm murders here in South Africa. The more we trade and read about it, the greater the fear emerges, and it grows and grows and grows and grows. So that's what anger and fear is, right? So because we're never talking about our anger and fear just as that, we're constantly trying to find justification for it. We can never really deal with it, right? But underneath that, because there's the third layer, this is the space that we never go, and that is our history, the historical matrix. We need to understand that our anger and our fear, remember, like I said in the beginning, feelings are not individual. They're not yours or mine. Feelings are created. We are taught. They come from somewhere. So my anger over farm murders is not mine. It is one that is rooted in our history, right? And this is critically important. So we never want to talk about our history in earnest, in a real way. We only want to talk about things in the factual matrix, but everything that happens in the factual matrix, we can root into our historical understanding of exclusion, of violence, of all these things we've spoken about, because it's those things that influence the anger and fear, which of course we're trying to use to discuss in the factual matrix. So yeah, we do have a shared anger and fear, absolutely, and that's nothing wrong with it. We just need spaces to talk about it as I am angry. Why are you angry? I don't know. And that's okay. I'm scared. I don't know.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, leads me to my next question. How do you create these safe spaces at home, where we can have conversations on racism and being homophobic, Islamophobia, where an Uncle Bob or even Auntie Spongile will say something offside, but in the context of also us being raised in these traditional homes. I mean, I'm a Zulu man, and in the patriarchal home, you were taught that, the dad has the final word and his word is final. He's the law, if you're introverted, how do you create these spaces, Because sometimes in my head, I'm like, do I actually want to have this conversation with my mom, 65? Like, I won't change your view, for example. I'm not saying my mom is homophobic, but as an example, but how do you create these safe spaces?
I have a very nuanced approach to this. And as somebody who does this work on a daily basis, who has a fair amount of courage to tell old white men on boards and executive committees that they need to be better, I really struggle taking these conversations home. Really, really, really struggle doing it. And that's okay. and that's kind of what I say to people. I'm like, it's okay, because sometimes, sometimes we're not going to have the energy, and that's okay. Sometimes we are. Sometimes we're going to feel a bit brave. Or sometimes something's going to cross a line that actually we can't let stand. And then we need to do it, right? But sometimes, if it's maybe not something close to our heart. So my parents say something Islamophobic, and because I've got real no emotional connection to Islam and that space, okay, I'm going to let it go. And you know what? I think that that's okay. I think that that's okay. I think it's okay to understand how complex our homes are, and that we also play out the role of son. Remember, we're also given the script of son or daughter or whatever. And because that is also an identity, right? Son is an identity. And maybe part of that script is also not calling out our parents. And you know what? That's okay. That doesn't make me inauthentic. It doesn't make me a sellout. It doesn't make me weak. It doesn't make me any of that. So obviously, how do we practice calling people out or calling people in more, right? Even though it is scary. So how do we challenge ourselves to do it? But also, how do we also say sometimes this is not the right time, or I don't have the energy, and that's also okay. Yeah. So a bit of like a wishy-washy answer, but I just think that's probably like the realist way to look at it. That sometimes it's just not worth it, and that's okay.
No, thank you on that. I think it will give a lot of people comfort. It's okay. You come from a traditional home, and it's going to be awkward having those conversations. And sometimes you don't always have to be, this woke person always tackling the issues. Because, thank you for that. Sometimes you just do need someone to say, it's okay not to have it.
Yeah. Totally okay.
I'm wary of time. We probably will go a bit over. It's just that I have so many things I want to talk about. But just two more questions just around, racism. There's this new, I don't know if it's new, but being anti-racist versus not being racist, Can you just describe to me the difference, and should we be as a society aiming to be anti-racist?
Yeah. Good. So I actually haven't plugged in so much into this conversation, actually, and I need to do it because there's a lot of books now, like How to Be an Anti-Racist, I know is one that a colleague of mine is reading. I think the differences is like, what's the difference between like colorblind or non-racial versus being anti-racist? Because, I think there's a lot of campaigns like be colorblind. And I think what anti-racists say is that being colorblind is you refusing to look at social injustices which still run along racial lines. So though being colorblind sounds great, right? Part of the Democratic Alliance is the DA's manifesto is non-racialism. We don't see race. It's a problem for the following reasons, because racism exists. And if we don't look at it, we can't solve it. If we don't look at it, we don't acknowledge it. So I think what anti-racism says is we need to be aggressively anti-racist, not passively colorblind, because there's no such thing as being passively colorblind. You become implicit. You start supporting, without even knowing it, the hierarchies of racial segregation, where anti-racism says, I see you structure, I see you violence, I see the continued discrimination and exclusion on racial lines, whether it's intentional or not is irrelevant, and I need to check and challenge that at every step. So I think anti-racism is about an alertness to what is and a strong disapproval of what is, right? So to put it simply, racism can be both interpersonal, so between you, me, and us, and then institutional or structural in our systems. And I guess anti-racism, or how I see it, is we need to be attacking both how it is we behave, you, me, and us, but also the things that exist within our system and our structure that support hierarchies of oppression and privilege.
Roy, so thanks for that, by the way. Even I know you haven't dug in deep, but I mean, it does actually provide a better view for me as well, because I'm also just here to learn. What's your view on cancel culture? Do you think it solves the core issue, or is it just people with pitchforks, like mob justice, like we just need to cancel anyone we don't disagree with? And what's your view on that?
Again, this is where I'm at right now with this. Again, may change. And this one is this is a really tough question for me. Cancel culture, I feel like I'm only giving you like wishy-washy answers, because I think part of part of these things, I just understand how complex these are, and I just don't think things exist on a binary. It's not as black and white. So cancel culture has done incredible things to create awareness around violence. Undeniable, right? Me Too, which is essentially part of or even started cancel culture, is absolutely vital because it said we cannot let violence continue anymore. So let's honor what cancel culture has done for society and has done to call out violence. And in many aspects, the idea of canceling somebody who has done horrific things, particularly in positions of power, is in fact an important message, and we need to honor that. Where are we at now in terms of cancel culture is, I think, a bit on the extreme end of what I think the intention is. And it's going to be case by case, right? It's not saying all cancel culture is problematic or all cancel culture has gone too far. But when I think we start looking at certain elements and looking back and saying, okay, now we must cancel Michael Jackson, and what does that really mean for us? Can we listen to the? I think it's complex. So I want to give an example. So I read this one thing. So Frantz Fanon, who is an incredible anti-racist and thinker on racism, a black man, yes, you might think yes, was homophobic. So some of his research that he did in black societies in the Caribbean, he kind of said that there's no homosexuality, doesn't exist in this culture. So there's kind of a call must we cancel Fanon? This incredible thinker on blackness and anti-racism. Do we now cancel him? And surely the answer is no, right? We have to be but wait, we can't cancel it. So do you see how I think we need to be more nuanced in our approach to what cancel culture means. So much like disidentification was what is it that we identify and can't identify, and how do we find in the middle? I'm wondering if there's not a place where we can understand that as well, right? Where we can hold the positives of the human experience as well as deeply critique, maybe even punish the bad aspects of people. But to see people as binary, as either bad or good, or racist or not racist, or sexist or not, I think is limiting. But again, I say this as a white man, who is not really that affected by racism, is not really that affected by sexism. So I don't even get for a moment the anger of a woman who's experienced sexual violence. I'm sure you'd want to burn this person and cancel them to hell, right? So I just want us to also understand where I'm coming from and how I'm positioned in this. But I am wondering if there's an opportunity for us to still punish bad behavior without necessarily condemning a person to the worst person on planet Earth. I don't know. Maybe there is an opportunity for us to do that. I think that's kind of it, right? And I'm also very weary of trendy things. Sometimes things are like wokeness has become trendy, right? And that's fine. I think it's good, but everything in society is a pendulum, right? It starts, it gains momentum, and then it gets a little bit far, and then it comes. So maybe in some ways, wokeism has gone a step too far, and we've become the alt-right or the alt-left in a sense. And what is that middle point? And again, there's no one answer for any of these things. It's how do we just be fluid about it, remain critical of certain aspects, but also alive to our positionality, that it's easy for me as a man to say, oh, but don't just cancel him because there was one allegation of sexual violence, when I navigate this world without any fear, ever. So.
No, interesting. I have my views on this, because sometimes I'm you look at a Kevin Hart situation, it's with cancel culture, you don't create this environment to also make mistakes, because we're human beings as well, and we make mistakes as we obviously go through this journey of life. So it becomes for me like a tricky balancing act, but there should be also room, as you say, I mean, to punish, like
Yeah.
extreme bad behavior. But yeah, it's no one has the perfect, silver bullet answer, So no, thank you for that.
I'd
I just
I'd
yeah.
also be very worried about anyone having a single answer for any of these questions. I think we need to.
Mm,
I'm increasingly, and again, I say this where the viewers must also listen to this from where I'm at now on my journey, right? Which may also change, but I think even for me, like, you can't not have these conversations around racism, sexism, homophobia without an extraordinary amount of compassion. And that compassion isn't because we're trying to mollycoddle or protect whiteness or masculinity or to whitewash and sanitize. No. For me, that deep sense of compassion comes when you understand how truly complex this is. When you understand how truly complicated social conditioning is, how truly complicated decision making is, how truly complex violence, oppression, and these structures are, when you understand how we as human beings have had our behaviors shaped through our parents' beliefs, through our schools, like that we are not our own people, when you understand that complexity, how can you not be compassionate? Because it's so complicated that to have an either or answer erases the deep complexity of the human experience. So the compassion isn't because we must like hold racists into compassion. It's like, no, racism is deeply complicated. And a person's journey to being a racist is so complex that when we are thinking to unravel that or to shift or to nudge that, we have to approach it with that same compassion through recognizing the complexity of how that person got there. And I think, yeah, I mean, that it's a challenge for all of us.
So Roy, I mean, I have two more questions just around inequality/equality, and then there's just something on my show that is tradition where I want to get to know you and unpack your hood. Just getting to know you better, which is about 6 questions there. So just doing a time check, but really enjoying the conversation. So many nuggets. I still need to go and download everything you're saying. But now speaking on just going on to inequality. This was a very powerful statement for me when you said it, actually, when you said equality is about treating different people differently
Yeah.
versus what traditionally we think about treating everyone equally and the same. Can you just unpack the statement for me?
Yeah, totally. So the history of equality, or rather, let me tell you what the Constitution of South Africa talks about when it says what equality is, because that's really where that statement comes from. It comes from a judgment in one of the constitutional court cases. So equality in its like layman's, like when we just hear the word, right? This is where English fails us. It's got like equal in. So we must think the same. So we hear the word equality and we're like, equal, everyone is equal, right? That is the most basic, accessible understanding of equality, right? Equal, everyone's equal. But when you understand what equality as a vehicle, as a concept, as an ideology is trying to do in this country, right? Because that's what it is. It's a vehicle, it's a tool.
Yeah.
The Constitutional Court was like, we have to understand that in a country, in a society that is so desperately unequal, treating everyone equally now with systems that sustain inequality is not possible. Because how are you going to change a system that promotes inequality and treat people equally? It doesn't make sense. The system will always win. So what equality is as a vehicle is to try and tackle the systems that see and sustain inequality and to invert it, right? To try and tackle that inequality by now treating different people differently in the opposite way that it used to be historically, in order to find a balance where we get to a point where we can treat everyone equally, right? So it is a recognition that our systems and our society is fundamentally unequal, and that treating everyone equally is not as easy as I choose to treat you equally when our systems require us to treat people unequally, right? Let me give you an example. If we don't have minimum minimum wage legislation,
Yep.
right? I, as a person, I could be a fantastic person. I could be a wonderful person. I'm going to pay my domestic worker the least possible, right? And because they know we must treat everyone equally. But the system that says that that body is uneducated and you can pay her less for more is a part of the system. So it's got nothing to do with Roy. It's the system. So, but now we can say, oh, we must treat everyone equally. Oh, but the system will still mean I'm going to pay her for 250 Rand a day.
Yeah.
Okay? So the idea of equality in the Constitutional Court says that system is going to sustain unequal behavior. So we need to start challenging the system in order to get to a point, right? So equality really is just about that. It's about treating different people differently in order for us to have access to equal opportunity. So if we think of this unequal system, we must now build the blocks for those who are on the receiving end of this bad system in order that they can have access to see what is going on. So it is a recognition that the system is unequal. It's not about behavior. And this is what people always think. They're like, oh, but should we treat everyone equally? Yes, babe, of course you must do that. We're not saying don't do that. But equality, as we're talking about, is about the system and the structures that sustain unequal behaviors. That is what we are saying. So people are probably watching this saying, oh, but that's equity. And where we kind of come in as an organization, we like, call it whatever you want. But the bottom line is the same thing. So what we have found is that because humans are irritating, right? We don't want to look at the problem. We want to talk about the language. It's like, oh, but we actually talk about equity. It's like, and we'll spend 45 minutes of an hour conversation saying, is it equality or equity? And then it's like, guys, what are we actually trying to do? This, fine. Who cares what it's called? Let's do it. So we're not going to spend time speaking about whether it's equity or equality. We're like, whatever language we want to use, cool. Let's get to this outcome. So yeah, that's it. And it feels counterintuitive, right? But it's not when you understand the system of inequality.
And I mean, I think you briefly alluded to it in terms of I was going to ask the question, what does an equal society look like? Which you've already said it's having access to equal opportunities, I guess, in terms of the end road. I have a question though. Do we deep down really want an equal society?
No.
Okay. Because I mean, we speak about these ideals like, guys, let's all get equal, etc. But deep down as humans, we want to be better than the next person. Maybe not like superbly better, but yeah, I want to feel, like I'm better than you, and like, do we? Yeah.
But outside of like me wanting to feel better than you, it's like, well, guys, do we really want an equal society? Because then I have to pay my domestic worker 5,000 Rand a month. I don't want to do that. I now get to pay her 1,600 Rand a month.
Yeah.
Wait, now I must pay. Do I really want that? No, because I don't want that.
Yeah.
Do I really want to have everyone competing for the same job that I'm competing for? No, I'm thrilled that my whiteness is a credential for that position, because then I'm going to earn more and I'm going to go on all the holidays. Like, I don't want to be competing with everyone. I don't want to have to pay my demand. I love the fact that we have cheap labor. So I'm being very crude and very blunt. And maybe people aren't like going to say that obviously, but kind of at the end of the day, capitalism requires inequality. We need nameless, faceless miners, black miners, to go underground and to get minerals that they could never wish to own in order to sell it for rich white. We need that. We have to have that. We cannot have the miners with names and faces, which is why Americana was so important in a sense, because and why the continued year on year saying, don't forget this, is because it's very easy to forget the nameless, faceless black miners, because capitalism requires that they remain nameless and faceless, or else it will never sustain. So yeah, look, I mean, like that's quite an intense way to look at it. But yeah, like I know we'll all drive past Alexandra Township and we'll say, oh, it's such an eyesore. I'm so hot. But it's lekker having your domestic work across the road and work for 250 rand a day, and you come to a beautiful, clean house. So we have to kind of just say, what do we want? And if we do want that, it means that we're going to lose some stuff. And I think this is the conversation that we're having with leaders and with people in organizations. Let's not talk about the benefits of diversity. Let's not talk about the benefits of equality. Let's not even talk about the benefits of an equal society and social justice. Let's talk about the cost should we get there. Let's talk about what you're willing to lose to get there. Are you willing to pay your domestic worker 8,000 rand a month? To work 70-hour weeks? No? Okay. Well, then let's stop having a conversation. Yeah. If you are, right, then we can talk about it. Right? Then let's go. But until we have sat with what we are willing to lose, we will never get the benefits of what it is we can gain from an equal society.
Powerful stuff, Roy. I think that's a nice way to end this segment. Man, sorry, I'm moved. Sorry. So I'm still just taking it all in. Now we're at the part of the show where I just want to get to know you. It's going to be 6 quick questions because I'm also just conscious of time. And yeah, just be vulnerable. It's normal, straightforward questions. Yeah, just getting to know Roy Gluckman.
Yeah.
The man. So I'll go straight ahead. What genre would you say your life is, whether it's music or a movie?
Wow, that's so great. It's definitely music. I find myself... and my partner's been like aware of it. Like sometimes a song pops into my head and I'm like singing the song, and then I realize that I'm trying to communicate something to her through that song that I don't necessarily know I'm feeling. So I often find like when a random song pops into my head, I pause and I'm like, okay, wait, what is this trying to communicate? Because it's something that I'm feeling right now. So mine is definitely a musical. It's like a broad, like I'm very dramatic. It's very much about drama. And it'll be a musical.
And if musical.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, just pop out in song.
Yes, totally. Okay, no. Like, why are you singing right now? It's like, I don't know, but this is what I'm feeling,
Yeah. Oh, no, that's awesome. Second question, is there something you're holding on to that you need to let go of?
Yes. There is and it's kind of come up in the last month where I basically totally burnt out end of August. Oh. And I had because I'm doing my master's at the time. I've got my master's hand in. I had so much work to do. I sent my proposal draft in for my master's. I came back with edits. It was all of these edits, and I was sitting in front of my computer and I just like closed my laptop and I just went for a walk. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I think the thing which came up for me in that very long walk was letting go of the need to control my life, other people, the direction, the output, the success, my plants in my flat. Like all of a sudden, I just like realized how many things I am trying to control and hold so tight. And when you understanding why I'm trying to control things is because given how I've been brought up in the home I was brought up in, I feel fundamentally unsafe in this world. I feel like I navigate this world expecting to be unsafe, expecting to be disappointed. And as a result, everything about my life is to control, because when I can control it, I can control the outcome, and that makes me feel safe. But the more you try control, the harder you squeeze.
Yeah,
it's suffocating. It removes the joy. And I was just walking and I was like, I have to learn to let go of my need to control. But in order to do that, I need to work on feeling safe in this world. Safe, which is tough.
Yeah. Truth, right? I mean, this is a big topic you also spoke on. And obviously truth can be subjective and we can go on this rabbit hole, but what's one important truth that few people agree with you on?
What is one important truth that few people agree with me on? I don't know, actually. I'm just trying to think of like of how to like put it together. I mean, I think one truth that people don't necessarily agree with me. I don't actually know. I don't actually know.
No, we can always come. We can come back to it.
Let me think
it's
about
fine.
that.
Which is maybe let me ask this question because it was one of my questions, right? What do you believe is true, even though you can't prove it?
I believe, and there is actually like an emerging truth on it. I really, really believe that there are things about the human experience and human connection that we cannot fully understand, particularly as it relates to healing, and illness. That part of how it is we heal is through like a deeper connection to things and to people. And that part of illness is a disconnection from things. So connection to nature, our disconnection, our absolute like obsession with our minds as opposed to our bodies. And I say this as somebody who really struggles with that, but I believe there are things that we cannot see that fundamentally affect how it is we experience this world. There's thinkings now on intergenerational trauma, that a large amount of what trauma people feel, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, is actually been passed down. And I mean, that's crazy that my experience today, which feels like it's mine, is in fact not mine, is in fact something passed down. In which case, what else is there about how we connect with people? Those moments when you're like, I feel like I know you, or when you feel like you're being watched and you turn around and you are being watched. Like, we are navigating this world and we think we know what's going on, but I honestly believe we don't know what the fuck is going on. that we are actually driven by way, way, way more subtle and powerful forces than what we think. And I guess I'm saying this and I'm actually like putting things together for me, because if I believe that, which I do, then why do I need to control things so much, when basically when I'm saying I am not in control, right? That there are things around me that are way more powerful. So I think maybe that's something for me. So yeah.
Okay. No, very, very interesting. My last question now. So Roy, say I have a lot of money, I get a tender, or I have a billboard on the N1. Big billboard where every car that drives there is gonna see it. What would you put on that billboard?
Nice. Stop eating meat. Stop eating meat. That is literally, if I could just tell people to do one thing, it's like stop eating meat.
Lovely. No, Roy, let me let you go as well. I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate this. This has been so enjoyable for me. I've learned a lot. I'm even thinking how I'm going to break this down. There's so many nuggets. And I'm hoping the listeners, whoever watches this, is going to learn something, even if it's 5 or 10 people. I think that's my aim and goal, where you can start to have these conversations, So thank you again. You really inspired me. Please continue to inspire us. Put out the videos. I was watching, some of your YouTube videos on the topics. I think people like you are actually going to move South Africa forward. Hopefully I'm part of that journey as well. But thank you for the work you're doing. For rising and living your purpose, because you inspire people like me. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's so kind. Thanks so much for your time. And yes, good luck with this. And yeah, I really appreciate being on this.
No, thank you. So what I'm going to do now, I'll stop recording and then I'm going to edit for like a week and then I'll just send it to you to view and then I guess we'll publish from there. But Roy, thank you very much. I'm so happy. You've actually made my month. And yeah, really looking forward to how the people respond to this as well.
I loved it. Thanks for the time and great questions. I really, really enjoyed this. If you want to do it again sometime, you just let me know. I'm always happy to do this.
Of course, Roy. No, thank you very much. Have a great day further.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.